Welcome to the Invite Health podcast, where our degreed healthcare professionals are excited to offer you the most important health and wellness information you need to make informed choices about your health. You can learn more about the products discussed in each of these episodes and all that Invite Health has to offer at www.invitehealth.com/podcast. First-time customers can use promo code podcast at checkout for an additional 15% off your first purchase. Let's get started.
What are the long-term impacts of stress, and how can you manage your stress in a much more efficient way? These are some of the things that I want to talk about today. I want to talk about the link between the brain and the immune system and the effects of chronic stress and how this can really impact your brain and your entire body. So many people deal with stress on a daily basis, and it can come in different forms, and there's different reasons that can bring on stress. And I want to talk about what you can be doing to help mitigate this. So I am Amanda Williams, MD, MPH, and on today's episode, we're talking all about stress. We're going to talk about anxiety disorders and just how common anxiety disorders are. We know that in the United States alone, there are over 40 million adults who experience some form of anxiety. Now, anxiety disorders on a whole are highly treatable, yet only maybe a quarter, not quite more than a quarter of the people who have anxiety are actually receiving proper treatment or therapy to manage their anxiety. And we know that people who have anxiety disorders are 3 to 5 times more likely to go to see a physician. And we know that they are 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for different psychiatric disorders. So these are the facts, they are the statistics that come from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. And we know that anxiety disorders also develop from a complex set of different risk factors. So we can look at brain chemistry, we can look at life events, we can look at genetics, for example. And it's not uncommon for someone who has stress and anxiety to also suffer from issues such as depression. We can look at panic disorders, social anxiety disorders, generalized anxiety disorders. These are all very common. There's people who have specific phobias where this can set upon significant internal stressors in the body, which can really impact our overall wellness. We can look at issues with PTSD. We can look at OCD, for example, obsessive compulsive disorder. Obviously, we have the whole slew of different major depressive disorders and depressive-like episodes that people can be dealing with. And we know that with certain health conditions, the co-occurrence of anxiety is much more heightened. So when we look at people who have irritable bowel syndrome, for example, we know that there is generally a comorbid condition of anxiety that goes along with that. When we look at people who have issues with sleep disturbances, whether that be insomnia or some form of disrupted sleep, there's usually that comorbid condition of anxiety that goes along with that. We can look at fibromyalgia, for example. This is very, very common. And there are people who maybe just say, you know what? I just get stressed from time to time. Maybe I get stressed because of something that happened at work, something that's happening within my family life. But we have to know how to best manage that chronic stress that sometimes people are under for years and years and years, because we know that this affects the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. And this is important that we understand what that is, that HPA axis, because with the adrenal glands being involved, with the hypothalamus in the brain and the pituitary gland all being involved, we have so many different hormones that are then impacted. So if we have someone who has chronic stress and their adrenal axis is being completely overrun and they have excess cortisol just being excreted and excreted, this can start to have an impact even on pancreatic function when we look at proper insulin balance. So you can have stress and we can have blood sugar abnormalities. So we know all of these things can happen. We know that there's certainly the correlation between chronic stress and issues with focus and attention and being able to retain memory or learn new things. So we always have to address the stress, and there are many different ways to go about it. As I mentioned, many people who have anxiety disorders and stress oftentimes are not properly treated. And for those who are treated, sometimes even the proper treatment course is not the right one for them. So many people get put on maybe benzodiazepines by their physician. Some people get put on antidepressant medications because of their anxiety and low mood states. Some people are put on different things that help them try to sleep at night. And what you always want to try and figure out is, number one, what is the root cause? Sometimes it's multiple things going on. If you have the underlying comorbid issue, such as irritable bowel syndrome, okay, we need to address that underlying issue in order to be able to resolve the stress issue. So you have to know how to go about approaching it. And one area that I find quite frequently people overlook is the importance of food and how much foods matter. And I go back time and time again to you are what you eat. And that is so incredibly true. We go back to Hippocrates. I always say this, but there is, let food be thy medicine. There is something to that. If someone is under stress and they are, racing against the clock to try and meet a deadline at work, or they're racing from one place to the next to try and take care of all these different errands throughout the day, and they feel that stress building up and they think that they're managing it as they're driving through the drive-thru and getting their fast food, that's probably not the best approach in terms of renourishing and supporting at that cellular level. So we have to know that foods are first and foremost. So trying to adhere to a Mediterranean diet is really your best choice, because this way you're going to be getting that comprehensive blend of vitamins and minerals that support the immune system. You're getting antioxidants that are naturally coming from those foods to fend off oxidative stress and ease inflammation. We know that the omega-3 fatty acids that are in a higher abundance in a Mediterranean diet certainly can help to ease inflammation. But there is a strong correlation between the different changes that can happen, even when we look at the architectural changes in the brain and stress. And we know that we can look for various circulating levels of cytokines, these markers for inflammation. We see this all the time, but yet it's just not done enough in terms of proper management. If someone goes into their physician, they say, hey, I'm really stressed out. What can I do? Next thing you know, they're maybe given some type of an anxiolytic, benzodiazepine, and out the door they go, but they never address the underlying issue. How is it that we can manage that stress? What can we do in terms of physical activities that can help to offset the stress? Is it yoga? Is it taking a walk? Is it doing some type of meditation in some way? So we have to take that mind, body, soul approach to managing stress. And we know that stress has long-term implications when we look at the cardiovascular system. And if we have excess stress and all of these circulating cytokines in the body, so all this inflammation, that's going to start to have a direct effect on the cardiovascular system. And when we look at why it is that people who have chronic stress oftentimes will then lead into chronic heart disease. And we can have issues with inflammation occurring within the vascular system. These are all things that we must be aware of. We have to recognize the fact that if we are not getting adequate sleep because of stress, what that can do in terms of our normal functionality throughout the day. When we put ourselves under stress, a small amount of stress in short increments is one thing, but to be in a steady state of stress really can be so incredibly problematic. And you can start to socially withdraw, and then maybe you just feel kind of down and out, and you don't have that desire to do any type of physical activity. And then you get more and more fatigued, and your mood starts to go down even more. And then your cognitive alertness starts to diminish, and you lose interest in things. These are all things that must be looked at. And we know one of the main pathways that is so incredibly important when we look at that management of stress is within the brain. and we look at tryptophan. Having adequate tryptophan, which comes from dietary intake, is so important when it comes to the body being able to manufacture serotonin. So serotonin is your happy neurotransmitter. In the absence of adequate serotonin, we are going to experience higher levels of neuroinflammation. We are going to experience much higher levels of loss of focus and feeling more on edge. So it's not just that one isolated pathway. We know that many pathways are involved, which is why when you have stress, it's systemic. You have all these biological pathways that almost over time become involved in that pattern of stress. And so this can then lower your immune system, which means that your resilience and your ability to adapt and to recover starts to go down. These are all things that have been studied, and we understand so much more now, and recognizing that chronic stress can cause many serious diseases. And if we don't manage it, we are really setting ourselves up for some really harmful effects. So what should we be doing? We know we need to look at the foods. So having a proper dietary intake of those good healthy foods, eating fruits and vegetables and healthy fats, snacking on things such as walnuts or almonds or pumpkin seeds throughout the day. These are things that can be very beneficial. And you may think, well, how in the world do just the foods alone help? They can, because those foods help to support those good healthy bacteria. There's such a strong connection between the gut and the brain. So if we're helping the nutrient absorption within the intestines, this is going to help to support not only our immune defenses, but also help to support within that HPA access. So remember that hypothalamus and the pituitary and the adrenals. So this is why foods really do matter. And your approach when it comes to exercise, getting onto a normal routine. Like I said, you don't have to go out and join a gym or become a marathon runner, but you do need to find something that you're passionate about and something that you enjoy doing. You know, whether it's maybe turning on your radio and just kind of moving to the music, you may find as a means for decompressing. And this is so critical when it comes to our overall wellness. We have to look at what nutrients we can incorporate in. We know that taking omega-3 fatty acids, things like fish oil and krill oil, are so advantageous, which is why they've been studied in the setting of depression and anxiety. And they recognize that when people have low levels of that critical and crucial and essential omega-3 fatty acid in their system, and they do this by doing a fatty acid analysis in your blood, that you are more likely to not only have greater levels of inflammation, but have greater levels of stress and anxiety and panic and depression. These have all been directly correlated to low omega-3 intake. So incorporating omega-3 fatty acids into your daily routine, very, very important. But then we can also look at other nutrients that can be so advantageous. And we can look at things such as theanine. And L-theanine is this really powerful amino acid that is predominantly derived from green tea. And this superpower of theanine does so much when it comes to supporting GABA. And we know that GABA is our relaxing or our calming neurotransmitter. So when we incorporate theanine into our routine, it helps the body with that proper release of GABA, which is why it's been studied in that setting when it comes to anxiety. When we look at maintaining a healthy stress response, L-theanine can be incredibly important to this. But we also know that L-theanine can also help the brain and the brain cells to fend off oxidative stress. Because remember, this is coming from green tea, so we know it has these antioxidant properties. And we know that high stress can induce excitotoxicity within the brain, and that can do damage to your brain cells. So having theanine on board not only helps with that GABA, but it also helps to fend off the negative effects of oxidative stress that happens within the brain during times of stress, especially when we think about chronic stress. So there's so many reasons why we want to avoid stress. We can look at the shortening of our telomeres. I've talked about this before. Do that cellular aging test. Look and see if the length of your telomeres is where it should be based off of your chronological age. This can tell you so much about what you need to do in terms of lifestyle modifications. We know that all of the different pathways of stress impact so many areas. Your cortisol, all of your different neurotransmitters, including serotonin and GABA. And we look at dopamine and norepinephrine. We know it can impact your insulin and your glucose. We know that high stress lowers our natural antioxidants, things like superoxide dismutase and glutathione and catalase. All of those levels can begin to diminish, all while our inflammatory cytokines go on a super frenzy of release. So we have all of these leukotrienes and cytokines driving up inflammation throughout the entire body. So this is why we have to take our health seriously. And when we have stress, whether it's work related, family related, it's emotionally related because of a chronic disease state, we have to know how to manage it the best that we possibly can. So incorporating nutrients such as omega-3 fatty acids, such as L-theanine, very, very beneficial. Rhodiola is another one, especially for those who feel like they're really dragging throughout the day. Rhodiola not only helps to mitigate because it's an adrenal adaptogenic herb, so it's working at the level of the adrenal glands to offset the negative implications of cortisol, it also works within the cellular component, the mitochondria, for energy production. So there's so many different things that come from nature that can be very, very beneficial. And just a basic multivitamin is something that would be advantageous. We know that the foods are not as nutrient dense as they used to be. So incorporating in a multivitamin, taking in a probiotic on a regular basis, giving yourself that opportunity to fend off oxidative stress and to manage the stress the best that we can. With all of those different lifestyle modifications, finding the right foods, exercising, getting onto a routine, taking in the adequate nutrients each and every single day, and enhancing those nutrients with things such as L-theanine would be very, very beneficial. So that is all that I have for you for today on my insight into stress. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Invite Health podcast. Remember, you can find all of our episodes for free wherever you listen to podcasts or by visiting invitehealth.com/podcast. Now, do make sure that you subscribe and leave us a review, and you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Invite Health, and we will see you next time for another episode of the Invite Health podcast.